Okay, so JLL, you fairly recently published your Data Center 2024 Global Outlook report. And I think the headline finding was that there's going to be massive data center growth. So perhaps you could just enlarge on that. What are the factors behind that? What exactly is going on in terms of that as a challenge and opportunity, I suppose?
Yeah, so we just released our global report. I think usually we choose five separate topics that we will cover and some trends or areas that we'll see over the next year or so. For this year, we decided to center around one key theme, and just how it affects every element of the data center sector. So for this year, our central theme for the report is the increased and changing demand requirements of data centers, but also on the flip side of that, the challenge that are associated with sourcing power. So we started to see AI coming through as a major driver for demand, but also is changing the requirements that we're seeing for demand. So we're seeing not only are we seeing increased amount of data on there, but we're seeing increased change in the use requirements of data centers, more compute power needed, more power required. And AI has been a real, we overuse the word disruption or disruptor in the real estate sector quite a lot, but AI really has been a true disruptor of the data center sector. It's affected not just the design, the operation, but also the location. We're seeing data centers kind of crop up. I think in the report we choose for kind of one of our headlines to talk about the changing demand dynamic is that over the next 5 years, consumers and businesses will generate twice as much data compared to all the data that's been created in the last 10 years. So it's really this kind of explosion we're seeing come through now.
Okay, and in terms of if it's possible to convert that into data center activity and growth, I guess. I mean, just how many more data centers, the expansion of data center capacity will this AI boom? I guess nobody quite understands, but have you got any sort of reasonably well calculated predictions as to where it might end up?
Yeah, we see a lot of numbers going out there, and we're very cautious that we don't want to kind of just a random number on it because we haven't really even seen the full use cases of AI come through now. With much of the AI development that we're seeing now is on the productivity and language model kind of side, but we're still seeing more and more use cases, more models coming through. And as we're seeing that, we're seeing the amount of training data points that are required increase logarithmically. It's growing exponentially there. So it's still an unknown, and we're very cautious at putting a number on that. But we know that the growth is kind of exploding, and as a result, we're seeing, well, I think one of our headlines is that we're seeing demand is regularly outstripping supply. For the flat D markets, the core markets in Europe, we're seeing demand far higher than the actual supply that's being delivered. As a result, I think one of our headlines from our quarterly reports is that we're seeing that translate to a upward pressure on rents. So when I've tracked co-location rents for the last 5-6 years, they've stayed relatively flat because even though demand has been really high for data centers, the growth in the sector has been enormous. But this year, we're seeing demand far higher than the supply coming through. Even though it's a record year for new supply added to the market, demand has just been huge. And as a result, we're seeing an average of 15% uplift in co-location rents for the year.
Okay, and I'm just wondering alongside that, I mean, are people, because as I understand it, a lot of the AI workloads, they're not, should we say, latency sensitive because they're doing sort of lots of number crunching in the background. So people don't necessarily need to have their data centers in those flat markets. So are you seeing any kind of trend for people looking more where the power is available and potentially building capacity?
Yeah, that's definitely it. Yeah, we're seeing that kind of trend towards taking the data center to the power rather than bringing the power to the data center. So, yeah, as you quite rightly pointed out, the data centers that are used for training the AI models, they're less latency dependent. They don't need to be close to the urban populations they serve, as we see with traditional data center space. So we're starting to see those companies look towards locations where there's an abundance of renewable energy. So we're seeing a lot of the Nordic countries position themselves as key countries for AI growth. So opportunities for where there can be data center development there. I know Norway, for example, the Norway Data Center Association just released their report highlighting the powerless availability and the opportunity of that country as well to kind of position themselves as a leader for that form of data center.
And more generally, obviously, AI data centers, there's a huge new demand. They're power hungry, these compute systems. So, and the industry's already sort of heading towards sustainability, has its roadmap. But I guess this newish development is going to focus in even more on getting more power efficiency. So, any thoughts as to what initiatives companies are either doing already or looking to do to optimize the power efficiency of the data center?
Yeah, that's the factor we're seeing. So that's where we see the change in the design and operations of data centers. So we start to see that shift towards liquid cooling. So any of the data centers, the high performance computing ones, where they're using the new GPU chips, require liquid cooling. Liquid cooling is a huge amount more efficient than air cooling. I've seen estimates that it can be up to 3,000 times more efficient there. So we start to see that shift towards liquid cooling solutions. I think a lot of the large hyperscalers are now shifting their operations, their developments all to liquid cooling there, and it's going to have a positive effect on the sustainability and the efficiency of those data centers using those. Obviously, it does have an effect on the capital expenditure is far higher for liquid cooling, but the gains that you're able to see from an efficiency point of view should outweigh those.
And in terms of, you referenced there, in terms of the people building data centers where plentiful power available and a lot of that's renewable. I'm just wondering, in terms of sustainability and energy resources, is that another? I know the industry's already, every data center shows you this certificate that all their power comes from renewable energy sources, whether or not that's they can actually trace where it comes from. But are we going to see again a sort of heightened effort to ensure that renewable power sources are hooked up to data centers? Is that going to be?
Yeah, I think so. So data centers are the world's largest purchaser of renewable energy. It's largely through PPA contracts, so it's largely through purchase power agreements. But it's also they're kind of now partnering more with renewable energy infrastructure. So we now start to see more effort, more concerted effort in terms of investment within that. I think that goes back to our point where the sector really, as a result of that, as being the largest purchaser of renewable energy, they really have the ability to kind of drive and transform the energy infrastructure sector, particularly where there's a large funding gap. Grid infrastructures around the globe require a huge amount of investment in order to not only facilitate the green energy transition, but they're also struggling in terms of to support the current global shift to electrification and also the expansion of critical digital infrastructure like data centers. It's a trend that we're seeing worldwide. The grids across the globe require huge amounts of investment. I think a quote we used in our report is in the EU, a third of grid infrastructures are over 40 years old, and they need huge amounts of investment. So I think that's where we're trying to highlight that there's a real opportunity for data centers to we give a lot of good examples of innovation and ingenuity in the sector, but where they have the ability to kind of drive meaningful change within that sector.
Yeah, you mentioned that obviously in terms of the grids across the globe need a lot of investment. So to what extent can the data center industry not be given a free pass, but can it say, well, we'd love to do all this, but we're dependent on governments, whether it's at a national level or local, renewing the grid and making sure it's truly sustainable, renewable, etc. Where does the balance lie, I suppose, into what the data centers are sort of responsible for and how much they can say, well, we're waiting, but until the EU or the US or whatever it is upgrades the grid, there's not a lot more we can do. Just any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's really what we're seeing a real concerted effort now from not only just an on-site power generation, but kind of to source the power themselves. So we're seeing that in Ireland's a really good example, where air grids have, there's a de facto moratorium on any new data center developments, where air grids are refusing to connect any new data centers until 2028. So we're now seeing data centers there look more closely on-site power generation. And we've got some good examples in our report where we start to see developers, data center operators as well, look at modular nuclear reactors, for example, for on-site power generation, or investment into local power renewable energy companies to kind of hook up and kind of make sure that they are not only are they using 100% renewable energy, but they're also putting capital into these new schemes, these developments.
Yeah, and you mentioned like small scale nuclear. So are people looking, do you think, innovating in terms of new power sources? I mean, hydrogen fuel cells are sort of in the mix, I guess, as well, although as I understand it, it's not being produced on an industrial scale yet. When green hydrogen does, then that's not. But I suppose what I'm saying is, what's the balance of effort between just being more efficient when it comes to traditional, wind and solar and stuff like that, as opposed to looking at innovative or somewhat untried but renewable energy sources?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing like an effort towards both. Like all cloud companies will have 100% renewable energy as their goal, and a lot of them will want to be carbon negative in the next couple of years. So they all have very ambitious goals, and we're starting to see the sector itself kind of really adhere to that as well. Particularly now, we're seeing private equity look more closely into the sector, is kind of really driving those sustainability goals. We're starting to see some innovation as well. So hydrogen fuel cells, for example, we've got there's a scheme in Ireland that will be the first hydrogen fuel data center in Europe. But we're also seeing more concerted effort as well for any on-site power generation to move away from diesel generators to other forms of renewable energy as well. And from a PUE point of view as well, we're starting to see that continue to reduce, or not increase, even though we're seeing that kind of push towards higher power requirements of data centers. PUE still remains fairly flat.
And you mentioned earlier on about liquid cooling, and as I understand it, there are various different approaches to it. So where is the industry? Is it just at the moment sort of coming to grips with liquid cooling as a concept before it, or is there a particular favorite technology? There's various, from full-on immersion, sort of putting everything under a liquid, to bringing the liquid very much to specific components within the IT. So any thoughts as to, are there any winners and losers, or is it too early? Everyone's just looking at liquid cooling as a one topic as opposed to more granular.
I think it's still too early to say what the winners and losers are on there. I think, we start to see immersive cooling really kind of come through in terms of the GPU chips that are being used for kind of AI generated data centers. But it's hard to tell, from a winner or loser point of view. I think it's one of those ones where it's most of the developers that are looking to any of their development pipeline going forward, they've all kind of had a closer look at what their cooling method is, and changing it to kind of meet those requirements, or kind of changing their development pipeline in order to be suited towards liquid cooling, both from an efficiency point of view, but also from a sustainability point of view. I think it largely depends on, there's a lot of factors that go into what the data center is used for, the location that it's based, what's available, and kind of from a local point of view. But it's still kind of too early to tell which one will be the kind of the main form of liquid cooling that's used in them.
And in terms of location, which again you talked about a little bit earlier, I suspect that the major centers will always have a reasonable amount of data centers there because of the preponderance of users there and the applications, etc. But can you foresee a time, or over time, more and more data centers? You mentioned the Nordics. Will they sort of drift further north, further south, if you like, to where the conditions, the abundance of energy, particular renewables, and or just the the climate, I guess, in the Nordics for many months of the year, you probably don't need too much artificial cooling, shall we say. So just thoughts as to how much data centers will follow climatic conditions and renewable
Yeah,
energy sources over time.
that's a lot. That's been one that's been a long time coming. So track the sector in between 8 and 9 years now, and it's always been talked about this kind of push towards these secondary locations, and it always feels like it's never quite happened. We've just seen this enormous growth in the flat D markets. The flat D markets make up 50% of the data center capacity of Europe. It's huge in terms of that drop off towards the secondary and tertiary markets. But now we're seeing like a real, because of power availability and regulation as well, we're seeing this really driving the secondary markets. So we're seeing this huge increased interest in both Southern Europe and the Nordics as a result. So the winners, if you like, for the secondary markets that we're seeing for the last year or so has been the likes of Madrid, Milan, Berlin, but also Stockholm and Norway as well. So they've really seen, a lot of operators and developers and even the cloud providers open up their regions in these locations, and they've seen enormous growth just over the last year or so.
And I don't know if the report covers it or not, but in terms of contrasting it, so at one level we've got these huge, great data centers that are got to be ready for AI workloads, and at the other end, another trend you may or may not have followed for quite a time, edge has been out there, and it was going to be the most amazing thing ever, and for whatever reason hasn't quite arrived yet. But I mean, I think it's Mobile World Congress on this week, and so that will no doubt renew the impetus a little bit. But any thoughts, I suppose, as to where the edge is, where it might be? Is it still waiting for that killer app, whether it's autonomous vehicles, or do you think, partly for reasons we've discussed, maybe there'll be more and more local? I know definitions of edge vary, but there will be more and more local data centers. But just
Yeah,
thoughts, I suppose.
it's like you said, it's another trend that we've been expecting to see, and it's never quite exploded. But I think, like you said, yeah, from an inference point of view, from having edge data centers that are interacting with the AI models in real time, as opposed to those data centers used in training, which can be located far away, ones that are talking to the AI models in real time, they'll need to be located close to the urban populations we see. We are seeing this now. We're going to start seeing this growth towards the edge markets as hyperscale edge is now becoming a thing, and they're looking towards these kind of metro hubs outside of the core regions. But we're also seeing greater use cases now from other real estate assets now utilizing data centers. So but Tottenham Hotspur Stadium is a really good example of this, where you can see the IBM data center that's located in the stadium. It's been billed as the most advanced football stadium that's been built, but it's got a data center there that's giving you real time information on customers' buying habits, or where there's a shortage in food or beer or anything in the stadium. So it's giving you that real time effect. And we're starting to see more of those use cases now particularly in the retail sector as well, particularly as it's interacting with people's real-time movements, as well as that massive growth towards the Internet of Things that we're still continuing to see. So it's one of those things where we always say it's kind of a matter of time now. We're seeing this explosion towards edge, and technology is really kind of driving that, as well as we're seeing greater micro and modular solutions within data centers.
And maybe just in summarizing, do you think, bearing in mind all of this pressure on data centers from AI, and then you referenced just there all the edge, the IoT, etc., do you think the industry is still capable of meeting the digital demand, which obviously it's not creating? So to a certain extent, it's just responding to consumers, businesses, and private consumers. And its sustainability objectives. Do you think it's possible to sort of get to net zero as a data center industry while also meeting the ever increasing demands of the digital world that is saying, build more data centers because we want to do more and more clever stuff? And just your thoughts.
Yeah, I think so. So I'm going to be optimistic on this point, just because we've seen, even over the last 8 years or so, we've seen huge amounts of development, both from an innovation and ingenuity point of view. We started to see data centers reuse excess heat into local municipalities. We've seen huge changes in design and operation of data centers where they're starting to use AI within their operation models to kind of give real-time feedback and changes towards how cooling works. We started to see that shift towards from air cooling to liquid cooling, which is far more efficient. So we started to see like huge changes in terms of the from a sustainability requirement. And yeah, again, I think they're some of the initiatives that we're seeing is some of the most inventive that we see across real estate sectors. I really do think that they have the ability to kind of drive meaningful change within the sector. I know regulation is coming, so that would be a huge push for them. But yeah, I'm gonna put my stance on the optimistic side of that, and I think that there's going to be continuing to be huge growth towards their sustainability efforts.
Okay, it's been lovely to chat, and thanks for sharing the insights into the report and your thoughts more generally on the industry. But at least, Daniel, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.